We are going to continue our panel this morning, and we're changing things up a little bit, but we're going to continue the theme of selling into hospitals and talking about the challenges and the opportunities and some of the things that successful companies should be doing. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. Again, Sara MacKinlay. I'm the general manager of Exsurco Medical. Have spent my 25 years in medical devices in senior leadership roles from companies such as Johnson & Johnson, Smith & Nephew, and delighted to be here working with this esteemed group and continuing to share best practices around selling into hospitals.
I am Tito Santiago, purchasing manager at the MetroHealth system. I have purposely chosen to spend my entire career in healthcare supply chain. I have worked in varied roles from director of contracting, director of supply chain, inventory control, you name it, I've done it in supply chain with the privilege of doing it at university hospitals, Sisters of Charity, MetroHealth, Deaconess Hospital. And it's something that I do because I enjoy.
I'm Mark McAndrew. I'm a partner with Taft, and Hollister, work in the business and finance and health and life sciences group. I work principally with companies in the healthcare space, working on corporate issues, commercial transactions, and regulatory compliance issues.
I'm Don Hubbard. I've spent the last 16 years selling into hospitals. From 2002 to 2012 with a company called PartSource, where we sold to clinical engineers up through material management and some at the C-suite. And since 2012 with Checkpoint Surgical, where I'm the vice president of sales and marketing, where we sell to surgeons predominantly. So I've seen a lot of different avenues, if you will, inside of hospitals.
I'm Rehan Waheed. I'm the Senior Director in the Results Management Office, or the RMO, in the Department of Integration and Transformation, or DO-IT, at the MetroHealth system. I'm also an internal medicine physician and assistant professor at Case.
Awesome. So I'm going to start us off with kind of maybe a simple question around your experiences, your varied experiences. And Tito, I think we'll start with you. I'm sure you've seen many reps call on you throughout your career in the various hospitals. If there were a couple of things that the really successful representatives do when calling on you, what would those be?
It's always follow hospital policy and procedure in regards to visitation by supply chain. And as was said previously, those are usually online on the hospital's website. But if you're curious, you can always call supply chain itself and get those and get what that policy and procedure is. But for me, it's always been being honest, being cognizant of my time and how I value my time. I expect you to value it as well. Bring integrity to the conversation. Do what you're going to say. I will do the same to you. I see it as a partnership. If I promise you I'm going to do something or get back to you, I expect the same from you. And just be consistent. As we discuss an opportunity or a process, make sure that you follow the guidelines. One thing that I will not abide with is if you do break a policy or you do not follow an instruction. Procurement professionals aren't very forgiving when it comes to a sales professional crossing them or not doing what they were told or advised to do, because usually there's some ramifications internally that they have to deal with.
So zero tolerance.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Rehan, same question to you. You've seen a lot. What's some of the best practices from your perspective?
So for me, it's been some of what you've said, is if we requested information, that we're actually getting the information as requested on time, and we're working together. At least for me, being in the clinical capacity, my schedule gets fairly slammed sometimes, so I unfortunately don't always get back, just because I'm in clinic. I've got other things that end up happening. So having that extra reminder call is always nice. Hey, I'm reaching out to you again, not in an angry manner, but more of just curative. Did you get a chance to talk? What happened? Is there anything else that we can do to help support you? And that conversation really resonates well with me, as I'm able to, oh, I completely forgot, I'm terribly sorry, we need this, this, and this, and we can kind of move forward from there. So having that is really helpful as we move forward, and knowing that if they've already been aware of the business and what policies are in place and they're following those. Sometimes they don't know, and I've got to guide them through it or help them connect with the right individuals, but if they're already aware, it usually runs a lot better.
Don, from your experience in managing large sales rep organizations, what have you seen? What works from your perspective?
Well, from the side of the vendor, I think what's critical is that you understand what the need sets are, what's important to the various constituents you're selling to. So for example, if I had an appointment with someone in supply chain, I'm not going to necessarily be talking a lot about the clinical value of my product, because that's not really what his interest level is. I'm going to be talking about the cost value, how we're reducing OR time, how our use of our device is going to make his life easier from his perspective. If I'm talking to a physician, I have a very different message. And that message is going to be wrapped much more around patient safety, better outcomes, perhaps ease of use. So you've got to really understand your target audience. And the one piece of advice I'd give everybody in the audience that's selling is learn how to be interesting in about 15 seconds. Because if you can't be, you've lost someone's attention almost from the get-go. So you want to make sure that your people have a very compelling ability to deliver a value proposition fast. Because if you can hook somebody in, then they'll listen more to you. But if you lose them from the get-go, you're done.
So the elevator speech really is important.
Oh, that's absolutely critical. We practice it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mark, I think you probably do a lot of training with some of the bigger device companies, and from what I hear, your practice, some of the smaller companies as well. Is there something that happens in training of those representatives that you see that really allow this to happen?
Yeah, so, I mean, at least from my perspective, some of the more fulfilling and gratifying conversations are where you can pick up with the sales and marketing folks that they're coachable, and that they understand certain types of legal requirements and just how big an issue compliance may be. Because I think in some respects the focus can be so much on getting the sale and getting to the right person that they really need to be sort of encouraged, and in some cases sort of drilled into, that hospitals do have certain policies that you do need to follow. There are certain laws that you do need to comply with, and really just structuring making sure they can structure their activities and they have the toolbox in order to do that.
Call on.
Yeah,
Absolutely, great point. Kind of backtracking a little bit about the clinical champion and the value analysis committees. Don, I'm kind of looking at you. You've probably had lots of experience calling on those committees.
Oh, yeah.
What has worked? If there's been a technique that your team has used to reach the clinical champion and the VAT, what has it been?
We, with our firm, we identify in each hospital what we call an SWC, a surgeon with clout. It's somebody that matters. It's somebody that if they're unhappy, it resonates. We identify that individual. We go through whatever internal process the hospital has to get them to try the product. If they like it, and in our case, in most cases they do, then they become our champion going through the value analysis committee. It is important that we coach them in terms of what the likely questions will be so they can articulate the clinical value. I believe strongly that every company that's selling to a hospital has to answer a very important question, and that is, why do I exist? Why do I matter? Why am I here? What problem am I solving? Because if you can't answer that, then you're going to die right there in value analysis. And from our perspective, you have to be able to answer you have to be able to solve one of three problems. Are you going to make the hospital more money? Are you going to save the hospital money? Or are you going to improve patient outcomes? Mm-hmm. If you can't answer one of those three in the affirmative, you're probably not going to go very far.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Tito, does that resonate from you, kind of coming from your vantage point in the hospital? How does that work with the value analysis, and how does that link up to you?
I kind of agree with Don, but also at the same time, having been on value analysis committees and run value analysis committees at different institutions, it begins with the foundation of the committee itself. You have to have people who are interested, who really want to take part in that process, because if that doesn't work, it doesn't matter really what Don or anybody brings to the table if you don't have a strong value analysis process. A physician or a champion is always important depending on the product. But in my experience, it's more of a nursing champion. They tend to use most of the products that go through value analysis. So understanding nursing needs, who the nurses with clout are, those are the ones that are really going to bring the most of the products and the services to value analysis that we review.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, that you can't forget the technical users and the user buyers of the product in the process.
Physicians tend to bring things that cost a lot of money to the table. So usually before they even bring it to a committee, supply chain has done a significant amount of analytics around that opportunity, including benchmarking with third-party companies like MD Bioline or ECRI or some of those, to make sure that we're getting the best value. And just to bring back to a point you mentioned before about capital and GPOs, we do use GPOs to buy capital, but whenever we get the price from to us, that's just the start. The GPO price is like list price at anywhere you go. We just look at that as supply chain professionals. That's where we start. What else are you going to do for us? Are you going to give us a better price in the equipment? Are we going to get a second year of warranty and labor at no charge? There are different things that we look at before we even bring it to the committee. Because when you bring it to the committee, you're prepared to say, this is our best and final offer. This is what they're putting on the table. And depending on the intricacy of the equipment, the complexity of the ask, we will ask the rep to come in because we are not qualified as supply chain professionals to maybe answer some of the questions that clinicians have. That's why we like the clinical champion and also the rep. And believe me, we closely monitor what is said by the vendor. We have a little coaching session before you enter into the room as to what you can say, what you can do. We give you 15 minutes, we leave you in the hallway, we come get you, we bring you in, then we kick you out. So it's a process.
Most don't let you in.
Yeah.
Most hospitals do not let you in, so that is more than most do.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. You've got your 15 minutes, Don. It's back to the elevator speech. You have to have it down, what you're going to say. Back on your comment about nursing engagement, what is your recommendation to companies to gain nursing engagement? Is it like the physician engagement, or any recommendations on how to make nursing engagement happen?
Well, I've always been trained that you always contact supply chain first. That is the dream world that we want, but that's not the world we live in as supply chain professionals. I don't work at main campus at Metro, but when I go there, I do see vendors meeting with nursing people. My hope is that they bring that to supply chain, and that the thing is, they can't buy anything until they come through us anyway. So they can agree to whatever they want, but until it comes through us, and we've done the vetting and the analytics, and also the consulting other departments, because you may want this widget, but another department's using a comparable widget, or the same type of, they like it, you don't like it. So we have to do a little bit of diplomacy there, using analytics, and emotional baggage has to be also addressed with these items, because some of the folks are really invested emotionally. You have to be able to manage that. You have to acknowledge that it exists. If nurse is angry because you don't want to bring this to back, you have to be able to manage that emotion for this time, but also for next time that you encounter this type of situation, these same type of people.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So let's move a little bit from, we've kind of got the door open now into the hospital. We've got some knowledge here. We know there's committees. We know that we have to go to supply chain. And let's make the assumption of a good outcome. Now comes the part, now comes some of the hard work. How do I gain adoption, and how do I get implementation and get some adherence to my program? And Rehan, I'm looking at you. What have you seen work really successfully from vendors, to get into your facility, to get your attention and to begin to implement? What works?
So I'm looking for what solution, right? So what problem are you solving? And if there isn't a problem that exists, I'm not making one. So if it's not solving a problem, there's not a need for a conversation. But if we're solving a problem, then let's have a conversation. And if it's, again, it's something I shared earlier, is if it can be applied across the system rather than a particular department, that's the right way to go. So if someone's talking to me and all they're sharing is, well, this really works purely in the ED, and that's the only place it works. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I need something like this that works across the system. That conversation isn't going to go very far. And if I ask questions about how could this be deployed in other areas and their response is a deer in headlights, that conversation is going to end very quickly. And I'm going to say, well, this is a great tool, but this might not be the tool that I need. I need to find a tool that does similar things, but that's across the enterprise. So again, going in prepared is going to be important, and knowing what solution is you're going to solve, and then having that right group. So getting the right group together to really to take a look at this particular tool to make sure it's going to fit, and there is going to be an adoption, and we're not going to run into barriers from other physicians, other administrators, as we say, you know, we all agreed, we got together, we saw it, we liked it, we asked questions, and we're moving forward, rather than two people get together, yeah, this is good, and then the third person finds out 3 weeks later, why wasn't I at that meeting? I don't like it anymore because I wasn't at that meeting. So really having all the people together at the right time is very important.
That's a great point. Don, you want to weigh in on that? Have you had an experience where your reps have done that really well?
Well, the you know, kind of the mantra, I think, with just about any company that sells into hospitals, you've got several stages, and what you're discussing is moving from acceptance. Yeah, we will purchase your product. We will, you know, allow usage, to adoption, which is where it's used on a frequent basis.
Right.
That's going to vary by product. I mean, there's some products that are going to be adopted almost immediately because they're just intrinsically so much better. Others will take a slower curve depending on if there's additional learning that has to be done by the physician or the support staff, depending on who you're selling to. So I don't think there's a quick and easy answer. I can simply tell you that from a sales management perspective, that's the critical path. And that is the one thing that I think of many companies can fall into the trap of, is going, woohoo, you know, we got acceptance, we're in, and off to the next hospital, forgetting that if you don't get adopted, getting on the shelf, and somebody said it earlier, means virtually nothing.
Yeah.
It just means you're there. Maybe you got one purchase order, but no one's going to do do an exit on one purchase order. It's getting the surgeon or the support people or whoever the constituent is to use it on a frequent, ongoing basis. That just really is going to depend product by product in terms of what it takes to get someone to change a behavior and adopt your product.
No.
Come back to value, right? So
Right,
if
exactly.
they actually see value in using the product, they're
Or they
going
don't.
to. Right.
And they don't. Yeah.
No, that's excellent. Kind of now jumping maybe around here, but I want to go back to a comment that was actually made during the break time, and that was the world of the GPO is kind of complex. There's a lot of them, and some of the GPOs also have value analysis committees that the products go through. How does a startup company figure all this out? That, you know, I might present to the value analysis committee, but that's really only step one. I mean, I have to understand the GPO. Any advice for companies? Don, I'll maybe start this one with you on that process.
Yeah, and GPOs are an interesting animal. I've dealt with them for many years. We have a contract with MedAssets. We don't have contracts with some of the others because, quite candidly, they don't have a category for our product. So can't get one, right? I view it much like you do. It's a starting point. And from our perspective, what it does is it gives us a vetting, if you will, to a facility that may never have heard of what a checkpoint is. I have no knowledge of what and how it works. At least I can point to it and say, a very large institution looked at our product, looked at our company, and said we were okay. And that's kind of how we use it to try to at least facilitate more, if you will, conversation inside of VAC. It doesn't ever overlay it. No hospital's ever looked at our GPO agreement and said, "Ooh, you're in." They all are going to evaluate us independently. But as far as how do you get started with the GPO, you really have to. It takes a lot of legwork. You have to go into the look at the GPOs. They are very regional. MedAssets, for example, has a very strong footprint here in the Midwest. Health Trust is very big in Florida and Texas, and Premier and Cardinal are out west. I mean, so you got to kind of know where you're selling. And then you just have to look on their category and say, which one do I fit? Now, they may not have a bid cycle that's even up. If you have a new product, many of them have new technology forms where you can, basically say, hey, I'm new and different, and therefore you got to create a category or allow for me to come in. And some may say, no, you're just better at what we already have. The next bid cycle is 2018. So you really just have to do a lot of legwork. There's a lot of shoe leather that has to go into figuring out where do I fit, which GPO matters, and then do they have a category for me? And then be prepared to fill out a lot of paperwork.
Well, I guess the paperwork is a great segue into, working with your legal counsel and making sure you understand how these agreements work. I mean, Mark, from your kind of vantage point, structuring agreement with a GPO, is there a lot of wiggle room there from the manufacturer, or how does that work?
It depends. So if you're an early stage startup and you're approaching a GPO, they will probably give you their form, and they will say, we may entertain no more than 5 changes, or something along those lines. If you're a much bigger company, there's a lot more negotiating room. And so when I was talking, in the prior session about, coming up with contract templates, I mean, ordinarily with GPOs, they'll have their own forms. Sometimes hospitals may as well. But ordinarily in the GPO setting, you'll be dealing with their form, and if they want to carry your product, they'll give you the form, and it's up to you to make sure that there are no issues with it.
How would a startup company that doesn't maybe have even a commercial footprint try to figure this out? And what kind of resources or guidance would you recommend to a startup? So
a couple things. One is, depending upon what type of product is being developed or being sold, I think the strategy will be different. So if it's a device, tangible product as opposed to software, the GPO setting or dealing directly with a hospital, is probably the best path forward. It's possible, and I've seen this with some software companies that I've worked with, where you can try to find distribution partners, and that could be someone who also has a different type of software package that's already in the hospital, and you may be sort of a bolt-on to that. And if you can negotiate an arrangement where they will essentially take your product or your offering and provide the entree, I mean, there are a lot of benefits to that. And in that type of arrangement, it's really going to be more or less what you can negotiate in terms of a revenue share, some type of royalty payment or something along those lines. But it's really case by case. But there are a lot of companies out there that have gotten started that way and have gotten some great traction by identifying a distribution partner who's already done the hard work of getting in the hospital door.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So I guess we really can't talk about the hospital and the business of a hospital without the impact of the Affordable Care Act. And Rehan, I guess we'll really start with you. How is it impacting your practice today, and what do you see coming in the future?
So again, the conversations that we've had in previous sessions have been, how are we moving away from fee-for-service to really talking about value? And we hear value over and over and over again. And the Accountable Care Act is a step in that direction. It's not the end, it's a start. And there's a lot more coming, especially as there are other managed care contracts that are occurring that are really looking at particular populations and trying to really look at how do we lower cost while improving quality at the same time. It seems simple, it isn't always. So, so when we're thinking about what do we need to get, we have to keep the bigger picture in mind. It's about a system, it's about the total cost of care, it's about looking at what quality metrics are part of our ACO agreement, what quality metrics are a part of our managed care contract. What I have, what you have, they might not be the same. Each hospital system right now, at times, is doing different things. So you might say, well, you're looking at high blood pressure values. Well, I'm focused on diabetes. Well, I'm looking at pregnant mothers. So each one could be very different. There might be some overlaps when it comes to HEDIS measures or PSI or other quality metrics that we're looking at, but many times there are not. So if you aren't aware of that and you're not looking into that, you're going to run into some challenges. But again, ACA is a start. The future is really going to be very different. Right now, people come to see me in person, and that's how I get paid. If I don't physically see them in clinic, I'm not making any money and I'm not getting paid. The future won't be that. The future will be very different. How many times in the past year have you gone to a bank to deposit a check? We haven't, right? That was the norm. That was the normal way to get a check into a bank, is you had to show up and talk to a teller. I haven't done that in a year, if not two. I do it with my phone, right? So there's going to be a dramatic change in healthcare at not only how it's delivered, but what avenues and what ways. And us physicians have to learn to adapt. If we don't, and we don't think about it, we're going to lose out to other retail clinics, we're going to lose out to other avenues, and we really need to be the spear of this, not the tail. So it's going to be changing dramatically to a lot more self-guided care. Dr. Boutros, our CEO, talks about this a lot as well. It's really bringing more to the patient, allowing the patient to have more accurate information, guide them through the appropriate process. The costs are changing as well with high deductibles. So there's more going out of pockets for patients. So patients are really shopping around. So if I as an institution can't provide the lowest cost to that patient, why would they come to me? So I need to make sure my costs are low, so my prices are low. And it's like any other business. Previously, healthcare was, well, I'll go wherever my insurance company says I can go. Well, that's changing. It's changing dramatically.
So change continues is
Yes.
what I hear. Tito, how about in your role, what is Accountable Care doing to purchasing?
I think it's put more demands on finding the most cost-effective products for clinicians to use in the patients, but also for EVS or dietary. All these departments add to the cost of why that patient's there. So we're under the pressure, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we get the best price possible. And sometimes the best price possible is not the least expensive item. It has to be the item that fits the system, the organizational needs the best. Because something that costs $10 could last a lot longer than something that costs $5, even though they're meant to do the same thing. You have to do that kind of analytics and that kind of work, and you have to have that kind of interaction with those people who own those departments. Because if you can get the widget, but if they don't like it, or they don't like the way you presented it, or you didn't involve them in that decision, like Don had said, the product will sit on the shelf. And they're just going to go back to what they used to do, and that way you've wasted a lot of time, a lot of energy on these things. So we're very cognizant of that, and that's how we help that initiative.
Yeah.
And you can never sacrifice quality.
Yes.
Ever. Quality has to improve.
Yeah.
And
That's
if we don't keep that in mind, it's not just about cutting costs, it's making sure quality is exceptional. You can never sacrifice quality.
You have to have the quality
Yep.
to
Yep.
be in, to be even entertained to come in.
Right.
So, no, I'm glad to hear you say that. Don, any, dare I say, structural changes or changes within your organization, SG&A related, in the face of Accountable Care? How are you dealing with it as a manufacturer?
It really, I wouldn't say that there's any structural changes inside our organization because of it, other than to say that we sell across the entire United States. And I can tell you, in literally every hospital we deal with, they're not exactly sure how it's going to impact them because it hasn't been clearly defined yet, but they know they're going to have to do more with less. And so there's sort of this overarching feeling that, like you said, that we have to do more with less, we have to get better value out of whatever that product is that we're purchasing. In our case, we add cost to the OR, we do. But in turn, we improve patient outcomes, and we reduce OR time, and we reduce the other costs associated with the procedure. So when we talk to people about it, we have to make sure they understand the entire value of our product, because if it's simply evaluated on, well, that
price
costs
point.
more than it did before, they'll say, well, okay, well, you're too expensive. But then when you factor in better patient outcomes, faster OR times, and other things that we can quantifiably measure, as a value, now our product becomes much more attractive to people. So I think that It's made companies like ours and other startups have to really hone their messaging and their game to understand that, because you can't just sell it to a physician and say, oh, I like this, without being able to articulate the entire value proposition throughout the entire chain of all the stakeholders, because there's a lot of stakeholders in this now that have a voice.
Yes.
It used to be, 15, 20 years ago, a surgeon could just walk in and say, I want to use that. There was no value analysis.
Yes.
There wasn't.
Yes.
And so it was completely driven by surgeon or physician preference. Whatever they wanted, they for the most part got.
Yep.
True story, about 15 years ago, but this is prior to back, maybe longer, maybe 2001, 2002, I sat in a conference with all the heads of the IDNs, the biggest of the big across the United States. There must have been 500 people in this room. And the keynote speaker was the CEO of the second largest IDN in the United States. And he was admonishing manufacturers for developing new products. He was yelling at them, saying, you have to stop making new products because our surgeons demand them and then we have to buy them. And our costs are going out of the roof. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, you're yelling at people for making things? Don't buy them. Mm-hmm. Well, that's prior to value analysis. So what happened was that pendulum that sat way up here where physicians could get whatever they wanted, swung back. And now there's the value analysis committees are very, very powerful, extremely powerful inside of hospitals in making sure that the entire value proposition is looked at beyond just an individual's preference.
Yes, yes. That is definitely a pendulum swing. I mean, Mark, anything to weigh in on that from a legal perspective or what you're seeing from your clients?
No, I think everything that was mentioned is exactly on point. Maybe the one thing that I might add, I see it a little bit with some of the early stage companies that I work with, both in the pharma space as well as the device and in the software space. We've seen a lot over the past several months. We're going to see more around concerns about product pricing. Typically, lately it's been with pharmaceuticals. And so when I work with early stage companies, one of the first couple slides you always see in the deck is going to be, okay, what's the path to reimbursement and what are the expectations going to be, because that's how you build the model. But what we're seeing right now, it's not so much payer reform, it's payment reform. And so a lot of those assumptions are going to have to be re-examined and looked at, because fee-for-service is moving all over the place. And what I'm seeing, both with early stage companies as well as with hospitals, is a lot of the hospitals are looking more at bundled payment models.
Absolutely.
And it's really going to be something that a lot of companies, and larger companies and smaller companies, are really going to have to get familiar with, because it's really going to impact how that model is going to play out. So that would be something to take a look at. That's some homework.
Yes, for all of us, for sure. Maybe just kind of now coming to the end cycle of you're in the hospital and you're gaining some adoption and training is a requirement. What really constitutes best practice for training the staff of a hospital, whether it's a med-surg floor, in the surgery, in supply chain? What is the expectation of how a company can and should train hospital staff? And Rehan, I know you've seen many things, and I think you've probably got a couple of stories for us.
So again, getting to training, each product will be a little different. So if you're dealing with a product that's used preferably mainly by nursing staff, it's going to more than likely go into nursing orientation and the annual nursing training that is done, at least within our system and with many others. So it's going to be something that's going to get built into that, so all the nurses that utilize it are familiar with it and are comfortable with it. As it comes to physicians, it'll be a little different. If it's an academic institution, and it might become part of their training, it might be part of the SIM center. If there's attending faculty who've never used it, if there's a SIM center at the institution, it's a great place to get them to go in to practice it and feel comfortable before they're actually using it. If not, it'll be a little different there. When it comes to operational things, you really have to have the operational team and the administrative leadership on board. early on to really talk about how will we utilize this in an operational setting. How do we make day-to-day changes? Do we have the policies in place right now? Do we have the procedures in place to leverage this new software or this new tool to really make an impact? So it depends. I think it goes back to that all day today, but it depends. But there's probably already some type of education that's occurring in the institution, even if it's not an academic setting, and to leverage that as much as you can.
Yeah. Don?
I mean, spot on. I mean, you know, and again, in our case, you know, you've got different constituents you have to educate. First and foremost is the surgeon that has to understand not only how to utilize the product, but where and when. You know, in our case, it's used predominantly in either revision surgeries or in places where the human anatomy has been altered. So we're talking about the specific cases and procedures where the device is going to be used. Then we have to educate them into how to use it. It's not a terribly complex device to understand, but it takes a lot of repetitive use to really kind of unlock it. I use the analogy like my phone. It's, you know, when I first got a smartphone, I made calls and that was it. Then I realized, wow, I have a computer in my pocket. I can do all kinds of things. And even now, there's stuff on it I don't know how to use because I'm 56, and you know that's just part of being 56, I guess. But you know, there are things that, you know, every day we have surgeons that have used it for years. They go, wow, I didn't know I could do this, even though we kind of told them. And then there's the OR staff. We do in-services where we show them, you know, kind of when it's going to be used, how to best present it, you know, all the different kind of nuances of it. And that's going to, it depends, right? Depends on the device. If it's a plug and play, if it's something that's a direct replacement for another product, it's pretty easy. If it's, in our case, you're changing a surgical technique, it may take a little longer. There's an axiom I learned a long time ago, and that is, if you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital. They're all different. Every one is different. And so it's the same theory. That's why I think that it depends is such a truism, because every surgeon's different, every device is different. You can kind of put a little bit of an umbrella over some of these things, but really it's going to come down to learning the people you're talking to, learning the, you know, kind of how their system works so that you can stay inside the lines and make sure that you're, you know, ascribing to what those expectations are. Some physicians are like, I got it, you know, I don't need you, I got it, you know, you're good, thank you. Others are like, I want you here for the first 10 procedures. So what's the rule? The rule is, I guess, when you see them do it and they feel comfortable and everybody around it's doing it right, you know, then you're there. But there's no like hard and fast, you know, axiom I can say 3.5 times and you're fine.
Done.
Yeah.
Right. Tito, from the purchasing viewpoint, what kind of training needs to happen with purchasing, and what's your expectation?
Typically, once a product or a service is adopted, we've already met with clinicians who would like the product, but in my experience, it's that point where we get to the training where we involve the education department. We have a meeting with the vendor, the nursing, or whatever department is, and education, because education does run the education for the system, for the hospital. They inform the vendor what the expectations are, what time do I need you here, here are the sheets we need you to fill out, here's the attendance. There's a lot of protocol with educating and documentation of that education. And once supply chain has that meeting with this group of people, then we let you run with it. We keep in touch throughout the whole project. The value analysis should also be, once a product is adopted and people are trained in using it, the best case scenario is that 6 months later, value analysis bring that back up. How is this going? Supply chain, have we saved the money? Clinicians, has this made your life better? Those questions have to be answered, because if not, a year later you're going to get, God, we hate this product, we hate this committee, why do you make us use this stuff? And I've heard that 1,000,000 times. So it's best to measure and monitor anything new you put into place. And just one add-on thing that Don said about bringing in, for surgeons who want 3 to 5, want you to be there for 3 to 5 cases, supply chain always says, do not bring anything else with you. So we call it, do not bring your ditty bag full of goodies that you're gonna, oh, you're using this product, but you know, this is really good too. Because that causes a big problem, because if it comes back to us, you get a big red mark in our book, and we may not meet with you so readily next time. So, because once you make a supply chain person angry, not very forgiving people.
They have very long memories.
Yes.
They really do.
And it takes a long time to
It
get back
does.
into
Yes.
good graces, doesn't it?
Decades. It does.
I appreciate your candor. Mark, so I'm going to ask the question about in-servicing, which is so critical to products. So can we bring in lunch and have lunch with the nursing staff while we in-service?
There are some people who take a conservative view, who say don't do that, depending upon what the value of the overall package might be and how many people are being fed. There are others who, so bright line rule, don't do it. There are others who take a more sort of flexible approach and say that that's permissible based upon the minimum amounts and the number of people and the overall value and how it's divided up.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it varies case by case depending upon how a particular hospital wants to interpret and enforce their rules. And I think, one thing I would say, just listening to Tito and Rehan, is that these policies do exist and they are enforced. So for vendors, it's worthwhile to spend the time and familiarize yourself with them because you do not want to be on the other side.
I'm hearing don't make assumptions either.
Oh, God, no. They're all different. I mean,
Yes.
they really are all different. And that doesn't mean one is better or worse than another. That's just, this is the roadmap.
Yes.
And so you need to know the roadmap. So you need to know within Hospital A, lunches are not only permissible, they're expected. And that if you don't, it's a breach of protocol. Others don't do it. I mean, either way, you have to report on the Sunshine Act once you do it. But I think that's where a lot of people in sales get in trouble is because they assume.
Yes.
It works here, so it'll work there. No, you have to know the law of the land.
Yeah, how true, how true.